Good morning, everybody. It's Steve Brown from Mirae ASSETSECURITIES with our Mirae Asset Live YouTube. Joining me this morning is our Head of Research, Mr. Minh, to discuss our Vietnam 2022 strategy and market outlook. Minh, thank you for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Stephen and our esteemed customers.
Now, Minh, Vietnam in 2021 has been probably the most dramatic stock market environment that I've ever witnessed since being in Vietnam in 2013. It's been a standout regional ASEAN 6 outperformer, around about 33.3%, 33.9% year-to-date increase from its year-to-date low of 998 points to its year-to-date high of 1,511 points, reached on the 26th of November. And this is all in light of probably the worst macro environment that the country's seen, the biggest GDP hit that the country's seen, and yet the government and the people are punching on through. And it all bodes well for 2022. So the key driving events of 2022 will include the stimulus bill, which is a $35 billion US package or thereabouts to be dispersed into public works and capital works, which will be great for some of the material suppliers, construction suppliers in particular. We'll start off with your take on how you see the key events progressing and where you think the main impetus drivers are for your outperformance for EPS growth, because you're probably the most optimistic head of research in Vietnam, much higher than consensus at 18% EPS growth. You're targeting the VN index to hit 1,700 points. PE forward of just 16 times, which is reasonable. And with that 24% EPS growth, I'll hand it over to you and you let me know why you think it's such a standout in ASEAN 6.
Yeah, before I move into the projection for the next year, I would like to talk about several key events, standout features of Vietnam stock markets. The first of all, I think that even though Vietnam stock market or Vietnam in general suffer from the COVID pandemic heavily, however, the stock market still performed very well. I can say that 2021 marked a record-breaking year with the VN index boasting an unrivaled year-to-date return at 33% year-to-date, outperform our regional or even international peers. For example, S&P 500 just 23% return, or like MSCI developing market just about like developed market just 17% of return, and Japan 1.4% only, almost flat.
Yes.
Or Korea negative 1.2%, or even like Hong Kong minus 13% of return. I mean the loss. Thailand about 8% and India 19%. So I'm just pinpoint some key figure of the markets, and no markets have a like 30% growth in return like Vietnam. So this is the very outstanding feature of the market, and those who believe in, who have invested in Vietnam for this year have a like grasp or harvest a very good result for this year. And Stephen, you know that the contribution to the outperforming of the markets also come from the government, whereas we have like to perform like effective quarantine or lockdown for quite several periods, especially from the third quarter. But it was, I believe it was, we may have suffered some kind of like stagnant in GDP growth, in economic growth. But what what we get later on is about the confidence of the investor. I find that the F0 investor, I mean the new investor, is a kind of booming month after month. Or in November, I remember that this is the first month we have more than 200,000 new accounts. I mean the trading accounts opened. That's almost double, like 100,000 per month, previous month in this year. And in comparison, compared to last year, I mean year-over-year comparison, I find that almost 3 times. So the confidence, I believe that one more pinpoints about the investor, about people or investors are more confident, become confident with the stock market, even we suffer heavily from the COVID pandemic. And those two figures can support me to have a bullish view or positive view on the following year. Yeah.
You've made a good point there with the increase in opening of new domestic accounts, which is a key driver, which will fuel your higher than consensus EPS growth. Back in December 2012, the domestic trading account numbers 1.248 million. And then you noted local investors opened a total of 1.3 million accounts year to date alone. So the start of the Vietnam stock market right up to December 2012, domestic trading accounts had accumulated to 1.248 million. Year to date, 2021, opened a total of 1.3 million, which on its own is more than the previous 4 years combined, 2017 to 2020. But it's also more than since inception through to December 2012. So the fact that we've had some months 140,000 new accounts, like in June alone, 130,000 accounts in November alone. The local investor community is also a huge inflow provider of capital into the markets as well, which has vastly outperformed any of the foreign institutional outflow that has dragged on the market. So once that starts to return, coupled with the increased equity participating retail investors, your EPS growth target of 24% is very reasonable. So we had, for instance, Dominic Scriven from Dragon Capital on this year, and he was talking about correctly the breadth of investment opportunities. A lot of companies, listed companies, over 400 on the VN index, over the course of the development of the exchange, we've now got to 45 of those over 1 billion that foreign institutions can look at. And that's up markedly from, as I said, 6 in 2011. So when I got here in 2013, that number was still only 7. So it's a different landscape. Pretty soon, again, we'll also start to see now even more companies listing corporate bonds on the Singapore Stock Exchange, and potentially we'll talk about later some of the big well-known brand name conglomerates entities looking at potential US listings as well. So the years to come, I think it's a very bullish and positive state of affairs.
Yeah, following your idea, I think that I would add some kind of interesting points into the bullish view of my own. First of all, I think that's the effect of the COVID pandemic becomes more smaller and smaller. I mean that the investor are become familiar with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it seemed to me that people feel very normal nowadays. 1 year ago, I think that many people felt shocked when the news about a new cases from COVID-19. But nowadays, it seems to be very common and very to be like it's
Learning,
normal life.
Learning to live with it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And more, the second viewpoint on the bullish view is that the stock market plays a very key role, like a capital market for firms. As you mentioned, we have that just of our 6 companies with a market cap about more than 1 billion a few years ago. Nowadays we have more than 40. So those 40 firms have I think successfully in developing the stock market, the capital market, and also they have a mutual benefit. Big companies need capital, and the capital supply enough like stocks and bonds for those companies to finance their balance sheets. And what I'm expecting that the capital market in Vietnam is developing very fast. Not only about the stock prices, but also the total trading value too. The total trading value is increased significantly, almost double on average, doubled and 1 year ago.
Correct. Latest figures, I think it's about 1.134 billion USD equivalent for the 3 exchanges combined. Average daily trading value for the Ho Chi Minh Exchange, Hanoi, and Upcom. So to put that into perspective, the Ho Chi Minh Exchange, again, if we look at December 2012, trading value, $31.1 million.
Okay.
Hanoi, 18.4, and Upcom, about $100,000 on a good day. It is now 1.134 billion year-to-date average daily trading value for the 3 exchanges, which is incredible. 927 million alone for the Ho Chi Minh Stock Exchange, and again, with the new increase of investment accounts of the retail local investors, that is just set to increase with margin lending increasing usage as well.
Yeah, a good news from that point is that the total trading value of Vietnam stock market sometimes exceeds those in Thailand, those in Singapore too. And I heard that many foreign investors complain about the poor or low liquidity of Vietnam stock market a few years ago. But nowadays, no one mention about this point anymore.
We rarely get the liquidity issue now.
Right, the liquidity is not the issues. I don't think so.
Yeah.
And the pinpoint, the liquidity become like nourish the new investment opportunities. Yeah, and that's kind of like supported by the local investor. You just mentioned about the new account, trading account open in a month or a year to date, significant increase too.
Another thing that puts foreign investors' minds at ease is the stability of the currency. A couple of days ago, the US Department of Treasury came out and qualified once again that the VND is a non-manipulated currency, which reassures a lot of foreign institutional investors for the stability. The stability of the VND has been around about 23,000 VND for several years. So it's a low volatility currency, and when foreign investors are looking at the ASEAN 6, that's one of the very important criteria that they have a look at, because some of the ASEAN 6 have been incredibly volatile this year, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, moving forward, we'll let you break into the presentation. You've got a 103-page slide deck. We won't go through all of those things, but the economic growth, which segues into your EPS growth targets, I think if we have a look at those from benefiting from GDP growth forecast update onwards for the moment.
Yeah, I think that the bright size of the Vietnamese economy is about we are developing country. I want to highlight the developing country. That means we have a quite high growth rate of GDP for a long time. I mean that sustainability of the growth is very important for this country. For some shock, may have some negative of quite flat GDP growth. However, in general, after the shock, I believe that the GDP growth will recover strongly, and we will go maintain at around 5 to 6%. I just say the low base case is 5 to 6% per annum for the growth rate. But sometimes we achieve a very high, like 8%. But 5 or 6% and very sustainable is important for this country, because if we go too much or too fast, we may sacrifice some kind of like monetary policy. We need more support from monetary policy and fiscal policy, but that not help those the kind of like stability. One the important indicator for macroeconomics is the stability in the price, stability in the state budgets, stability in the currency value, stability in export-import activities. So even we suffer from the COVID, but it seems everything seems stable. I mean stable. The currency you just mentioned, a little bit volatile, but still stable. And I want to share with you one information about Vietnam, the value of this currency. Vietnam is a very few country in the world regain the value against the USD, whereas most of the country like Korea, Japan, Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, their currency, I should say, lose the value. But this country, the Vietnamese don't become stronger, and yeah, that's a good point for investor, because if they invest in Vietnam, their asset here gain the value. That's a good point. And so I mean that stability is important. And stability is look like a buffet for any new shock. We don't know, like COVID pandemic, for example, we don't know in advance, but we need stability to absorb the shock from the market, absorb from the like some unanticipated event. But what I mean that stability exists in this country, and that's why investors become more confident.
To underscore confidence, foreign reserves, the IMF seems to think they're now at a new record high, and in excess of 100 billion, potentially up to over 110 to 113 billion by the end of this calendar year. Foreign outflows still about 800 million less than domestic inflows year to date. Cumulative FDI year to date, very reasonable, very impressive, over $17 billion as well. And there's a few things there which I'd like us now to touch on. The standout FDI corporation is one that's very close to Korean hearts, which is Samsung, and they've historically been the biggest single FDI investor with their factories in Vietnam. They've recently announced they've started a $220 million R&D facility, which is their first one of its kind outside of Korea, up near Hanoi. And the company itself has invested already over $18 billion into Vietnam over the last 24 years. So it's been a very long-term partner for Vietnam and for the citizens, and 29% of that just in the last 5 years as well. So exports are about 89 to 90% of its revenues. And the other companies that I'd like you to have a little bit of a comment on, an opinion on, is the Lego Group, firstly. Lego Group, in the last few days, has come out and announced that it's going to build its new factory in Southeast Asia in Vietnam. And on the 8th of December, it signed a MOU with the Vietnam-Singapore Industrial Park, VSIP, which is in a 50-kilometre commute of Ho Chi Minh City. And it will have a carbon-neutral factory where it will also have solar energy. Wow. And they will plant 50,000 trees to offset the small amount of vegetation removed during construction. and they're hoping to have that up and running by about 2024 for full toy production. And second half of next year is when they'll officially really start to break ground and kick it off. It's the 6th Lego factory, and the FDI quantum, as I noted, is over $1 billion US, creating up to 4,000 jobs. Now, in your opinion, the fact that we've had a new entrant, a Danish privately held family company, which has been going since 1932 or thereabouts, coming into the landscape, that surely must underscore if private successful businesses are happy to join in the FDI scene here, similar to a big listed conglomerate like Samsung. It makes Vietnam the ASEAN 6 outperformer for FDI attractiveness.
In addition to like Samsung, you mentioned, or Lego Group, I have some kind of a new project here. Big project, billion project. For example, like Long thermal power with the register about 3.1 billion US dollar. Or like one plant from textile and petrochemical from Taiwan, about 1 billion US dollar. Or like a craft Vina paper mill projects like 600 million US dollar. So those guys, or an LG display, also like open a new factory in Vietnam this year too. And this number on this new investor can create a lot of new jobs for Vietnamese people and may contribute further to the total exports of this country. And in the energy sector, I mean the electricity generators, Vietnam is a developing country, but actually we suffer from the electricity shortage. I mean the demand for electricity exceeds the supply at the moment. So we have to import electricity from Laos, from China. But I expect that in the next few years, when those projects in operations, we can have enough electricity, and so the trade surplus may increase significantly in the next coming year, and the trade surplus can result in like more foreign reserve, and the Vietnamese dong can be more stable and revalue again more further and further with the US dollar, and that's very important for the macro level. Because you know that the Ministry of the Treasury in the U.S. sometimes claim that Vietnamese manipulate them Vietnam dong, but actually not when the Vietnam dong gain their its value. So no more manipulation at all.
So expanding from FDI now to FII, we've had a lot of news in this year to date about FII and M&A interest in Vietnam. MASconnect has been leading the charge with that. Their entity, the Crown X, has now achieved about $1.5 billion worth of inflows from international investors since the start of January 2020.
Yep.
In most recent days, this week, we heard that the company had received about $350 million in new investment from the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Sovereign Fund, ADIA, and also Seatown of Singapore, which is in unison to what's gone on before with UK bearing private equity and Alibaba pouring $400 million into the Crown X. The other interesting activity that I noticed is Mizu Bank of Japan has invested $170 million for a 7.5% stake in Momo, the e-wallet company. And your take on where you see the FII landscape for next year?
I believe that the FII will be another plus for Vietnam stock market next year. Some good news from VinFast or Vingroup. They will have planned to raise $1 billion US from the US stock markets. Regardless how the deal structure is it, but I believe they were successful in raising the deal, and the benefits of the deals will support the capital or capex on the VinFast factory worldwide, local in Vietnam and worldwide. Moreover, it takes time for VinFast to achieve the break-even point. You know what I mean? When you set up a new factory, it takes a couple of years to have to become a kind of mass production.
With VinFast, they only started that around about 2017, but already November 16, they officially put its US headquarters in Los Angeles into operation. And that's in the Playa Vista neighborhood of LA, which they call the Silicon Beach of Los Angeles. The news follows on from VinFast's recent news of a $200 million US commitment in California. And on the back of that, the company has a 15,000 square foot facility now in LA. It can house up to 400 people. The company also received a $20.5 million tax credit from the state of California, which is one of the largest ones that has been given by the state of California in recognition of its technology and of its business vision. And the program has a 10-year history in California there, and it's going to look at employing local US citizens there to help with R&D there, and also to roll out its vehicle range. They're looking at about 60 company-owned outlets for its electronic SUV range in California. So on top of that, they've got electronic buses, electronic motorcycle scooters as well. And last year they sold almost 30,000 vehicles and automotives, electronic and also gas-engined vehicles in Vietnam. So the facility in Hai Phong, Vietnam, that they've got will be complemented by the facilities in California. When you were talking about them doing a potential raising, the thought is there that they may look at transfer of some of the Vingroup's VinFast shares to Singapore to enable through subsequent listing on the US market. We'll wait to see how that all works out. It's not for us to really discuss at the moment about that, because we're not too communicated about the finality of that announcement or rumor yet. But it all sounds very exciting for the company, which is why we've been fielding calls as far afield as New York and London in recent weeks about Vingroup and VinFast. The other thing with that company, electric vehicles need electric batteries. And on December 12, just this week, VinS, which is Vingroup Energy Solutions, they announced a $4,000 billion factory to produce battery cells. First phase will be 100,000 battery packs a year. Phase 2 will increase that to 1 million battery packs per year, which will be able to internally supply their projected battery needs. So they're actually quite unique. Aside from maybe Tesla, they can look at having everything vertically integrated within their own business conglomerate. So the company is on a bit of a solid trajectory, Vingroup, and it's been quite strong this last second half with the volatility in the market. It's really quite been holding its own. The other thing that we can look at now is the corporate bond market. Where do you see the corporate bond market in 2022, both in Vietnam and for Vietnamese companies maybe on the Singapore Stock Exchange?
I believe that the Vietnamese firms have demand for corporate bonds to finance their expanding affect their development. You know that with the high growth rate of EPS a high rate of sales per year per annum. Our forecast about like 24% of EPS. It means that they need a lot of capital, and bond in corporate bond is quite important for them. However, there's some kind of like a little bit challenging and for the next year, because some kind of size effect from Evergrande in China, when the government can impose a stricter policy for issuing new corporate bonds. However, in Vietnam, I believe that the corporate bond still like booming for the next year, very similar to like in the banking sector. You know that Vietnam's capital market is quite like less developed than other countries. So corporate bonds and banking sectors are playing a key role in financing big project, big investment. And corporate bonds can have another challenging, but I think it's positive way. I mean, that is a higher interest rate. I mean, higher coupon. You know that inflation is one of the issues worldwide these days. However, in Vietnam, we don't see any big trouble with the inflation, because I mean that inflation in Vietnam is still stable, and so a little bit higher may be good for the whole economy, because it makes the economy is more like sustainable. We don't need to raise so much. I mean, the state bank, central bank in Vietnam, may not raise so much interest rate, policy interest rate. So the corporate bond have some kind of like room for development for the next year.
There's been over $20 billion raised through 826 corporate bond issuances in the first 11 months of this year, which is quite an amazing achievement. 95% of those were private offerings. Real estate firms, about 38% of the total, and then the banking sector, about 36%, which is in keeping with their weightings in the market. They're the two dominant sectors, aren't they? Then there's also been a couple of those, which 3 issuances worth $1 billion on the international market, specifically year to date on the Singapore Stock Exchange, and some of the iconic real estate companies in Vietnam doing so there for their bond issuances. So it shows that if the Singapore Stock Exchange is welcoming for Vietnamese companies in that regard, they're a little bit more relaxed and comfortable and welcoming perhaps than if you have a look at some of the other issuers which have had huge debt overhang. You know, Evergrande, I heard, was around about 300 billion in outstanding obligations just in its own conglomerate. You know, so for Vietnam to have a diversity of over 800 issuers with just 21.5 billion, the risk is a little bit more
diversified, right?
Diversified. It's a little bit less problematic if there is one corporate failure.
Yeah.
You know, and we've had some clients talk about the similarities with Evergrande, with Vietnam bond issuances, but by that fact alone, over 800 issuers for 20 billion or thereabouts, 3 issuers for about $1 billion on the SGX in Singapore. It's not really worth even comparing.
Yeah, one information from the bond market is that some big firms in Vietnam try to get credit rating from international agencies like Standout, Moody's. I believe that this kind of activity is in their plan to approach the international bond market. Some big firms in Vietnam have planned to issue like international bond, and I believe international banks too. And I believe that those kind of activity is very important and increase the transparency, and of course maybe have a cap and lower cost for local firms, because international corporate bonds have an interest rate, a coupon rate is much lower than Vietnamese currency bond or local bond. And that's one of the benefits. Moreover, the reputation, the reputation of the firm who can successful in issuing international bonds can open a gate for them to achieve, to work into the international capital market. Not only the bond, but maybe issuing shares in the future, or listing share in the future in international stock markets.
The bad debt ratios related to COVID-19 pandemic, in the short term, it's been contemplated that they might hit a spike not seen since about 2017. But the State Bank of Vietnam has been very much on the front foot to try to defend the interests of both the borrowers with their businesses impacted, and also the lenders, such as the banks. So the recent September 7 announcement circular supplementing another series of debt rescheduled payments and so on, I think is on the front foot, and it's a good thing to see, because a lot of businesses have had their revenue complicated by the COVID-19 situation. So they're trying in a very thoughtful way to help both the suffering businesses and the banks achieve respectable growth targets across the board. So what they're looking at, bad debt ratio for 2021, I believe it's just 1.9%, which is actually still not too bad if you have a look at how it was in 2018, 1.9, and the bad debt ratio did hit 1.99 in 2017, but we haven't really had yet any banks looking like their numbers are problematic. If anything, they're having increased charter capital so they can get State Bank of Vietnam approval to extend credit growth. And next year probably the same for them and securities companies.
In my opinion, commercial banks are already prepared for that kind of situation. Actually, they have to set aside some kind of reservation, or like some kind of like buffet for the loan loss, potential loan loss. And you know that last year and this year, even though the COVID pandemic outbreak in Vietnam, but the banking sector is still booming. Most of the banks have like huge profit, and with the high profit for the last 2 years, can have enough resources or cash capital to prepare for the loan loss maybe in the following year. And the State Bank of Vietnam are also like request commercial bank for that kind of scenarios. And so for next year, banking sector, I believe that there's some still stable. I don't say very good, but I mean stable, because banks have to set aside some kind of like profits, some kind of resource for the best scenarios. And with that, with the preparation for the last 2 years, I think that the banking system in Vietnam will recover and thrive, for the following year. And yeah, banking stock, you know that the market cap, the total banking shares is about like more than 1/3, about 36 or 35% of the total market shares. It's a huge one, very huge one. And so with the stability, the health of the commercial banks are very critical in this country. So I believe that state bank also have some kind of measurements, and such measurement also imposed for the beginning of this year, when they require, the state bank request the higher loan loss recovery ratios for commercial banks. Yeah, and I find that that's a good policy.
It's interesting to see how the banks are evolving in Vietnam too, because this week, following on from last week's announcement, HSBC Vietnam has just had their signing ceremony with Vina Capital, which is one of the leading asset managers active in Vietnam, where 4 of their locally investing funds will now be available for HSBC premier relationship managers to discuss and to have their customers consider as part of an overall wealth management platform, which is, in my experience, being in Vietnam, quite a unique thing to see, because previously the investment options for a banking client in Vietnam were investment-linked unit trusts with a bit of an insurance underlying policy there. But this expansion now is becoming very, very global standard. And there's a lot of money sitting in deposits still in Vietnam. So in the coming time, if the portion of that money can also segue into the capital markets via mutual funds, your EPS growth target again is starting to look more and more reasonable, because it's not just on the back of shorter term traders. It's also now being supported by the mostly long only mutual fund investment vehicles of Vina Capital and Dragon Capital. They do some shorter term trading, but Vina Capital is very much like, the Berkshire Hathaway of Vietnam. It's a long specialist, and I think it's a great sign to see. And I'm sure many of the Vietnamese banks will start to have a smorgasbord of options for their customers who want to access shares, and they can do it through a multitude of providers in the coming time.
I believe so, because the new products in this market is becoming booming these days. New products for investment, for worker, for staff. They prepare for the retirement very soon. And with that kind of preparement, I think that the financial market can have become more familiar with all mass people, even not only the rich, but also have a middle income people, or even a little bit low income people. They want to have they set aside some kind of saving for the future, and by saving, I think that the investment in Vietnam can be booming again. So kind of mutual benefit when some organization like VinaCap, DC, or previously VFM, for example, can have a new product for mass people like that. I think that they will invest in stock and bond and stock. And that's why the trading value, the trading volume, and the market cap is larger year after year.
Now, just lastly, to wrap things up, could you just give us a few stock ideas in certain sectors? If we start off in banks, I noted in the first week of December, you had a company update for a top tier 2 bank, being VIB, upside just under 10% in the short term on that one. Commonwealth Bank of Australia has board presence on VIB. They've also got a position as the strategic with about 20% stake in VIB Bank. It's got a great app. The tier 1 bank choices that take your fancy for next year in banking?
I believe that for tier 1, it may still stable like this, but some tier 2, I mean quite middle, so small bank can have an outperformance because the middle and small bank show their ambitions to become larger, bigger and bigger to catch up with the tier 1. Besides banks, I think that I have some forecast on the following year about the EPS growth. Some other sector like real estate, for example, can have 31% EPS growth, or like diversified financial, I mean the for brokerage services, or like some big investor, RE for example, they have like some cap like 36% of EPS growth. So even that the very low GDP growth like 5 to 6%, but the EPS growth of some sectors still like over 30%.
You're bullish too on return on equity for a few companies as well. I see you like Vinamilk.
Right.
You think, well, it's an attractive price. It's
Right.
under 90,000 VND a share. So maybe next year.
Vietnamese is a good company. I mean, and their products is very essential for people in Vietnam and some export too. But I mean that for some row company, I mean rowing company is more important. In Vietnam, we prefer row, and with high growth rate of EPS, high growth of sales, we expected that we high growth of share price too. And energy stock also is attractive when the EPS growth may be at 26%. That this year and next year, the phenomenon El Nino, that means that we have a less rain, more drought, so that the thermal power generator will become attractive, become a key generator for electricity in this country. And thermal power generator like POW or NT2 or some stock like that, very attractive for the following year.
And what about aviation? Airport Corporation of Vietnam is firing on all cylinders. They've been working hard with the Long Tan International Airport expansion, the Ho Chi Minh City access for the international airport. The company's share price is at record highs. It's been holding up very well throughout this calendar year. Vietnam Airlines had a bit of a hiccup. Where do you see Vietjet in this picture? Because on December 15, the government, I think, is looking at once again reopening international air travel. So it could be, the thing that they're waiting for.
Of course, aviation and tourism is the kind of two sectors hit strongly by the COVID pandemic. And I believe that when Vietnamese people are all vaccinated, so people can travel again, locally first and then internationally. And I think that the aviation sector will become attractive with the new passenger will increasing significantly, because this year and last year the number of passengers have been like quite low. And most of the activity of the air carriers just about the good transporter
turning into cargo.
Cargo transporter, not the cargo. It's not the passenger, but from the first day of next year, I think that the air carrier can become attractive again when the number of passengers increasing, and we will see. I expect that we will see the crowded airports again. It's a head issue too.
And construction materials, bullish on HPG's had a great year. Still keen on HPG?
I would prefer like some kind of like construction firms than just like materials.
Like Hoa Binh?
Hoa Binh Construction, or Licoji, or like C47 or Facon, FCN. Why the reason I favor the construction firms, because those firms are related to the infrastructure development, which has been like stimulated by our government, and the government have big plan to invest in this infrastructure for the following year. So that's why we expected that the construction firm will have a busy year.
So the stimulus bill beneficiaries include the companies that you've noted there: Ficon, Licoji, Hoa Binh Corporation, maybe Kodakons might be able to get some of that too. So very good. All right then. And lastly, to wrap things up with your consumer plays, that's a huge part of the market, very popular part of the market. We touched on Vinamilk. You think it's an integral part of the VN index. Mobile World Group, PNJ, FPT. To wrap things up.
For food and foodstuff, I would pick like some exporting food products. Vietnamese have an advantage in like seafood exporting products like shrimp, basa, for example, fish. And I believe that those kind of export will be booming again for the next year because the demand for food worldwide increasing significantly. But this year and last year, maybe some stagnation due to the transportation. I mean the shipping issues, the cost issue.
Would you include rice in that export drive picture, like pan?
Yeah, the rising, the export of like seafood and agricultural products can become like an investment hub or investment pond for investor again, because agriculture, Vietnam is an agricultural country, and so that's why the firms with agriculture products can become like booming again, like a normal time.
Right. Okay. All very interesting, very exciting. Thank you for being on Mirae Asset, Minh. It's a pleasure to have you on. We spoke originally, I think, talked about the Q1 review and outlook, and back then you said you're bullish for the market to hit 1,400 points. It hit 1,511 in November, but there's been a little bit of profit taking in recent times, and the global Omicron crisis has seen a little bit of money off the table again, but it's still over the 1,400. So you got that target smartly, and let's hope you get your 1,700 by this time at the end of 2022.
Yeah, we set we have a target for 1,700 for the new year, next year. Yeah, because relying on the EPS growth, and of course, and FDI and MII will track a lot, and of course with like some stable of the currency, I think that one of the favorable, one of the conditions for investor coming is about the stability of the economy and of this country too. So Vietnam is a stable country, and I believe that Vietnam will become a hub for investment too, not only manufacturing but investment too.
Very good. Thank you very much. Minh Le, the head of research for Mirae Asset Securities, and it's Steve Brown from Mirae Asset Securities Institutional Division. Have a good day. Thank you.